I'm really excited because today's video is all about eyeshadow palettes, specifically about eyeshadow palettes that either define me or I feel passionate about in some way. This is the eyeshadow palette tag, which was originally created by Samantha March and Allie Glines. They did it some time ago, and I asked my friend Hersa from the Hersa Way on all socials if she wanted to do a collaboration, and she came up with this idea, especially after she saw Batty Bean do her take on this video not too long ago. If you haven't checked out Hersa's page or work, I definitely recommend it. She does some really fun content and beautiful looks, and we share a love for sparkle and color. I have detailed swatches and demos, so let's get into it. The first question is, what is your favorite eyeshadow palette of all time? And honestly, this is a pretty hard question for me to answer because my favorites do change by year to year, season to season. But this Sea Beauty palette that is a collaboration between Freya and Cheryeep came to mind pretty quickly. I just feel so inspired when I look at this palette. I love the matte tones in here. You have so many nuanced tones. And honestly, I feel like that's kind of saying a lot because in the past couple of years, there's been a lot of eyeshadow palettes to come out that are in a similar vein to this color story. But there's something about the selection of the mattes in here that feel quite nuanced. I also really love the selection of shimmers that are in here. I love that you get some straight shimmers, you get some holographic shades, you have a shade that's more like a sparkly topper. And the price point on this palette is honestly pretty good. I find that to be the case with a lot of the palettes from this brand in general. And I do feel like every time I mention this palette, at least one person tells me how much they enjoy this palette as well. So I know that it's been a palette that's withstood the test of time because at this point it's been out for almost a couple years, I want to say. So for sure, if I used all the shades in this palette up or I lost it for some reason, I definitely would repurchase it. And I think that's honestly saying a lot. If you're curious, you can get this palette from Lookhealthystore, Cbeautymall, Yes Style, and TikTok Shop, among other places I believe as well. Okay, the next prompt is, what's your new favorite eyeshadow palette? And to that, I answer this palette from another Sea Beauty brand called Dramo. This palette is called Fear of the Unknown, and it was made in collaboration with an incredible content creator named Lau. I am putting her handle and a photo of a look that she did up on the screen now. This palette is called Fear of the Unknown, and words can simply not express how much I love this palette. This is the first palette I have tried from Dramo, but honestly, I was completely blown away with the formula. Not just of the shimmers, which I have swatched first, but also of the mattes. Typically, I do prefer having a higher ratio of shimmers than we get in this palette, but honestly, in this case, I did not care whatsoever. The shimmers that you do get are so incredibly high impact. They can be used in a variety of ways, and I love how different they are. But I found this matte formula to be absolutely something else, like incredibly easy to blend out. And I just never would have really thought of a color story quite like this. You have a bunch of quite muted shades, but then also some sort of bright toned mattes in here. And that deep kind of blackened purple is absolutely perfect for being able to add some smokiness to any look that you might create, which I love. I almost never feel like a palette is complete unless it has some type of very deep matte. That's just another personal preference thing for me. Okay, the next prompt we have is an eyeshadow palette that you keep for the memories. I picked the Pat McGrathDivine Rose, and my palette looks new because I actually received this one in PR. I had previously had my own that was much older. And the significant memory for me with this palette is that I wore it when I was pregnant with my first child for a little photo shoot. And at that time, it was actually super hard to arrange because this was right after COVID had broken out in 2020. Obviously, it was such a high stress time, and my Pat McGrath palettes were just so near and dear to me. I got into makeup, especially creative makeup, a little bit later in life, and Pat McGrath palettes were some of the first palettes that I ever tried when I was already somewhat of a working professional. So Pat McGrath as a brand just holds a lot of nostalgia for me. This color story, I feel like, is not my favorite from the brand by any means. I do think it's one of the more basic color stories. Don't get me wrong, you get a lot of very pretty shimmers in here. When it comes to quality that you get in Pat McGrath palettes, you just can't deny it. It's just that in comparison to palettes like Subliminal and Subversive, it's just not as exciting to me. But when I look at this palette, I'm always going to remember that I wore it when I was pregnant with my first kiddo, that I was living across the country for my husband, and that I was just trying to look a little bit glamorous in a time that I wasn't really feeling glamorous at all. And I feel saddened after hearing that Pat McGrath has filed for bankruptcy, so I'm just truly hoping that they're going to be a brand that makes it. We'll get to see some of the creations from Pat McGrath and her brilliant creative mind. Next prompt we have is an underrated palette, and I've talked about this palette several times before. This is Morally Grey from Beaute Bar. And the reason I say it's underrated is because they don't even sell this palette anymore, and it makes me think that it just wasn't one of their top selling palettes because they sell a bunch of their older palettes, even from a few years ago. But I gotta say, I was so sparked by creativity when it came to using this palette. And it is a smaller palette, but there's something about the shimmers in here and the combination of the shimmers and the mattes that just really works. I think the contrast that you get between those lighter and deeper shades is such a vibe. A smoky eye is one of my favorite types of looks, and I just really love the looks that I was able to create with this palette. In general, I also just feel like smaller palettes are a little bit underrated. I know so many people enjoy big color stories, big palettes, and tons of options, but I don't know, there's just something to be said for a smaller curation. I also find a tremendous amount of satisfaction to being able to pack a travel makeup bag with everything I want for the trip in that bag, including the palette. So having some smaller palettes that I can travel with is something that I love. I do really hope to see that Beaute Bar does some smaller palettes in the future, because I want to say this is one of the smallest palettes that they've ever come out with, if not the smallest. I also just feel like the combination of pink and gray is very underrated. And yeah, this palette is just one that I still can't stop thinking about. Okay, the next category that we have is a palette that you keep despite it not really being a favorite. And for this category, I have another Pat McGrath palette. This is Sunlit Seduction. This is one in what felt like 100 pink palettes to come out from Pat McGrath. It's just one that really doesn't stand out in my mind, both in the fact that it's, yes, another pink palette, but I also just feel like the mattes and the shimmers in here just don't stand out to me, even in the same way that Divine Rose 1 and 2 did. And don't get me wrong, again, it's a pretty palette. It's just not standout. And in addition, you don't get any of the kind of more special baked shimmers. At least I don't think so. You do have some shades that are very sparkly though. It's a palette that I can't declutter because I'm very nostalgic about Pat McGrath in general, and this was a palette that I received in PR. It's honestly not a mothership that I would have purchased on my own. The ones that I would have wanted are the one with the really impressive green shadow, Subversive, and even Bronze Seduction, but I don't have those palettes. I even just feel like of all of the pink motherships that came out, this one just doesn't really stand out in my mind. To me, it's just not a very memorable palette. I'm curious though, let me know in the comments what your favorite mothership palette is and if you have any of them. And how do you feel about what's going on with the brand? Okay, next palette we have is a palette that is your favorite collaboration. This is a palette that I've talked about several times before. It's Southern Goth, which was made in collaboration with Jessica Hayes and Mob Beauty. I feel like this one might come as a bit of a surprise because you don't get any duochromes or multichromes in here. But this truly is one that I can't stop thinking about. It's been a palette that inspires me from the time that it's come out. I really enjoy the cream clay shadow formula. I love the grungy tones in here. I've talked about how I really enjoy that green suspended sparkle bomb. And one thing I really enjoy about the cream clay shadow formula is wearing the shades on my cheeks as blush and even on the lips as a comfortable matte lipstick. I truly think Jessica Hayes is an incredible makeup artist. I love how she shares so many tutorials, does extended long education in her reels, and she just has such an impeccable sense for color, for style, and for makeup products in general. I feel like so many of her collab products with Mob Beauty have ended up being some of my favorite products from the brand in general. And I just have a feeling that we'll get to see more products between Mob and Jessica in the future. Okay, the next question is favorite palette of 2024. And I'm doing this palette in 2026, so I modified the question a little bit to be my favorite palette of 2025. And I picked Dewdrops 2. I feel like this probably isn't going to be too surprising of an answer because I've talked about Diveroon and specifically the Dewdrops palette quite a few times. When it comes to iridescent palettes that are out there, I feel like the ones from Diveroon are really the best. And that's saying a lot because let's be honest, there's a lot of iridescent palettes that are out there at this point. I really enjoy the curation of both Dewdrops 1 and Dewdrops 2, but something about the impact of these shades just always gets me so excited to use it. You can use these shades on the eyes, of course, and you can also use them as highlighting shades. I think I may have mentioned this in a previous video, but this palette was actually used on Chappell Roan by Chappell Roan's makeup artist. I think that's not only a fun fact, but also just a testament to how great this product is. I hope they decide to do more of these Dewdrops palettes in the future. Another thing I love about it is, of course, how compact it is. I love being able to take this palette on the go in my makeup bag. Okay, the next prompt is a palette that wasn't expected to be as much of a hit as it was for me. And to that, I answer the Lethal collaboration palette with The Conjuring. Honestly, when I saw this palette revealed, I just didn't feel very excited about it. The color story looks pretty boring and basic, if I'm honest. But when I got it and I started using it, I actually ended up feeling different. First of all, the shimmers are much prettier in person than they are just when looking at the palette online or even in photographs. The shimmers in here are actually very sparkly. I also like that you have a holographic shade in here. And I like that you can do a sort of day-to-day look with this palette, but amped up. I feel like a palette that you can use for a purpose like this is also underrated. And I like that even though it's a sort of basic palette, you do have some more kind of colorful shades. And yeah, I don't know, I just ended up really enjoying using this a lot more than I had anticipated. I am always a little bit harsh to judge Lethal palettes in general because they have some palettes that have truly knocked it out of the water for me. The Dexter palette would be a good example of that. And they've really upped their game when it comes to improving the formulas of their shimmers over time. I just get a little nervous because they've been reformulating and repackaging. And I just really hope that their formulas stay at the high quality I know from Lethal. I've also seen several reviews of this palette and heard that it's been enjoyed by quite a few other people. So I do feel like this one landed. Okay, the next prompt is a palette that sparks joy when you use it. And for this one, I picked the Atlantis palette from Kryptein Cosmetics. This is another one I know I've talked about a few times before, and for a well-deserved reason. First is Kryptein Cosmetics is one of the best eyeshadow formulas that I have in my collection. They're a C Beauty brand. They have a beautiful buildable matte formula, and the shimmers in here, I am going to go out on a limb and say they're the best of any eyeshadow palettes. And again, that's saying a lot, I know, but the owner of this brand is nuts about really special shimmers. So I know that is incredibly important to them when making their palettes. The reason why I picked the Atlantis palette for a palette that sparks joy is because this is a blue monochromatic palette. Blue is my favorite eyeshadow color to wear, and so it just feels like a comfort zone color for me. I could happily use this palette and this palette only for an extended period of time and be perfectly happy. I also like that even though it's a blue monochromatic palette, you have some neutral tones in here, so you could very easily do a simple smoky eye if you wanted, or use one of these shimmers just as an easy one and done type of shade. If you've tried Kryptein Cosmetics, definitely let me know in the comments. I feel like every time people mention them to me, they also say they've really enjoyed their palettes and their formulas. Okay, the next prompt we have is the newest palette to our collection. And for this, I have another Lethal Cosmetics palette. This is the collab between them and SpongeBob. They do a lot of really fun collaborations, and I honestly love them because it just feels like they always put so much energy into them. The names for the shades, the products that come with them, like the brushes, lip products, highlighters, everything just feels very well thought out. This color story is out of my comfort zone, but honestly a lot of fun. I feel like they're a lot more harmonious than I had initially thought. I had a lot of fun creating a look with this palette. Honestly, I have to say this isn't the best colorful matte formula that I've tried from Lethal. I don't know if it's different than normal for them, but that was just my experience. The shimmers in here, I don't feel that same way. I feel like the shimmers are the shimmers I know and love from Lethal. And I love that you have a high ratio of shimmers and that you get some chromes and some iridescence. You can definitely create some high impact, very sparkly looks with this one. I particularly love that cobalt blue matte that you have in here. I just feel like it anchors the palette and it pairs so well with so many of the shimmers that you get in here. Yellow mattes are honestly pretty hard to formulate. I think if I had really wanted to get that yellow matte to pop on my skin, I should have used some type of light base with it. And I don't think that's anything that's formula specific, just something about yellow mattes in general on medium to deeper skin tones. Another little fun touch about this palette is that it came with a real lock and key. I've never seen that before, and it's just another example of how Lethal really does consider all of the little details. Okay, the next prompt is, what's the first palette that you used this year? And for me, it was this collaboration palette between Freya and Cbeautymall. As you already know, I really enjoy Freya collab palettes. And of course, I enjoy this one because you get some beautiful pops of blue in here. As always, you get a very solid formula when it comes to Cbeautymall palettes. The mattes are so easy to work with. You get so many special shimmers, especially this blue hollow is just the one that I always want to use when I use this palette. I gotta admit, it does have a few elements in it that are a little bit hard for me to conceptualize incorporating into looks, specifically when it comes to the coral matte and the kind of beigey pink matte. I feel like those are tones that I wouldn't really think to build into my looks. But something that I really enjoy about Freya is that she always shares a lot of inspo content. So if I'm feeling stuck with using one of her palettes, I'll often reference her looks and use them as inspo for my own. Even though this doesn't displace the other collab palette that I've already talked about, the Floating Life one, I feel like at the end of the day, I might end up using this one even more because of the blue tones and how much I love using blue eyeshadow in general. Okay, the last prompt we have is, what's a palette that you enjoy traveling with? And of course, I had to include one of the pocket palettes from Cloudicos. I cheated a little bit for this one because I have a few answers. I absolutely love to travel with a compact shimmer palette. And of course, the tones that you have in Pocket Winter are totally my vibe. The shimmers that you get from these Cloudicos palettes in general tend to have a super high impact, and they're not pans that you're going to go through super quickly, at least in my experience. And Pocket Winter is so beautiful. You get these really rich blue tones. You have some super sparkly and shiny silver shades. And one of the sleeper shades that you have in this palette is that kind of like blue purple duochrome. This one just never really stood a chance at being displaced as a favorite. But if you happen to like lighter and ethereal chromes, I think you might really like the Pocket Summer or the Pocket Spring palette. And if you like very neutral tones that are good for day-to-day, then I think you'd like the Pocket Autumn palette. I think I also forgot to mention this, but Cloudicos is an Australia-based indie brand. Okay, my second answer for palettes that I like to travel with is this palette from LH Cosmetics. This is called the Aurora palette, and it came out in 2025. It actually is the first time that I had tried LH Cosmetics. I'd had these little palettes on my wish list for a super long time. They honestly did not disappoint at all. Now, these palettes are definitely on the pricey side. You get 4 shimmers, and I want to say they retail for around $50. But it's not at all uncommon for LH Cosmetics to do very deep discounts for a lot of their products. I want to say you can even get this for 50% off at times, which is honestly a great deal. What I enjoy about this palette is similar to what I enjoy about other all iridescent palettes. It's how versatile they are. You can wear them on the eyes, on the cheeks, and there's something about the formula of these shimmers that just works so well for that purpose. I like that in the Aurora palette you get slightly more neutral tones, so if you are someone who really likes the concept of the Dive Room palette but felt like maybe the vibes were a little bit too colorful or bright and intense, I think the LH Cosmetics one may be a great alternative. To me, it seems like this brand has super cool products in general, and I'll be waiting for another sale to maybe try out some of the liquid shadows. Now that I've had a chance to go through all of the prompts, I'd love to hear what you think of my responses. As you know, I love to talk about eyeshadow, especially sparkly eyeshadow. I can't wait to hear Hairsa's responses. Make sure to check out her video as well. If you made it to the end of the video, please leave me a palette emoji. I'd also really love to hear what you would respond to some of these prompts. As always, I hope you found my video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.